Hi everyone, this is Elias Martin of CollectingJapanesePrints.com. Welcome to Woodblock Wednesday, where every Wednesday we get together and discuss Japanese prints, paintings, history, and culture. I'm running a little late right now, and that's because just when I was getting ready to start Woodblock Wednesday, wouldn't you know it, I got a delivery. So I had to deal with that, so I'm a little bit late. But it's nice to see all of you. Today's Woodblock Wednesday was inspired by a conversation I had with a client yesterday, and we were just discussing some of the past videos that I produced, and he mentioned he likes he likes contemporary art, contemporary Japanese prints, as well as other genre of prints. Which is very common. You know, I've clients and friends who collect contemporary Japanese prints, but they also collect Shinhanga or Meiji or Edo period prints. And then that's the really great thing about collecting. You can mix and match, go into different areas, and there's still a wonderful conversation occurring. Contemporary Japanese artists are aware of their history, their very rich history of printmaking, and it's interesting what conversations pop up in their work. And so, you know, I spent a little bit of time yesterday and this morning thinking about what I'd like to discuss with you, and I decided to present one of my favorite contemporary Japanese print makers. His name is Ida Shoichi. And Ida produced an amazing body of work. He was quite active, and he was quite versatile in producing artwork. I mean, he did prints, but he did all kinds of prints, lithographs, woodblock prints and mixed media. But he also did sculpture, and he did painting, and he did sort of work that involved, you can call them paintings, but he used sort of mud and natural elements to construct visual images on canvas, which are very compelling. Actually, I have one on my wall. It's a small one, and maybe I can show it, though the lighting's not great. But anyway, Ida's work is fantastic, and let me give you a little bit of information on him. He was born in Kyoto, Japan's old capital. He was born in 1941. He passed away in 2006, so relatively recently. And he chose to live in Kyoto for most of his life. In Kyoto, for those of you who haven't been to Japan, it's the old capital, but it's also the artistic spirit of Japan. All of Japan's rich history relating to culture and art, it survives very richly in Kyoto. It's sort of the spirit of Japan. Tokyo certainly has a vibrant art life. There's a lot of wonderful museums, and there's museums peppered across Japan that are very much worthwhile. But Kyoto, there's something about that city. It almost as if art is in the air. It kind of reminds me of Florence. And in fact, Florence is one of my favorite cities in the world, but so is Kyoto. And I think for that very reason, that there's this sort of just something in the water, in the air, that makes people interested in culture and in art. And so because he was very interested in art, and from that city, he had centuries of Japanese art to sort of draw upon. And printmaking in Kyoto was not necessarily something that took a root. Printmaking was really more focused in Tokyo during the Edo period. Of course, there's some really wonderful Osaka artists that were based in Kansai and in Kyoto, but by and large, printmaking was mostly focused in Tokyo. But he drew upon the culture, Japanese culture, and its rich history, and the traditions of Zen and other, ideas. Many are contemporary art ideas, and he mixed them together to produce some really interesting and compelling artwork. And I could stand here and talk to you all about his life and his work, but I think it's easier to sort of describe him as an artist by engaging his prints directly. And I pulled a few here on the table. I actually have been collecting his work for the last 10 years to present in an exhibition, which will be available for sale. But these prints technically are available, but they're being set aside for an exhibition, a retrospective on his work. I'm a big fan of his prints, and I don't think that many galleries have really focused on his work recently, and so I think it's worth obviously a revisit, and so I'm planning an exhibition in the not too distant future on his work. But without further ado, let's go to the table and have a look. So let me sort of back out here and pan out. I'm going to just show you the table. There's plenty of artwork here. Another reason I chose Ida is because he has such large prints, and I have other stuff on top of my table. I'm doing year-end inventory and other things, and so I don't have that much room, and so I have stuff everywhere, and so these prints kind of hide what's underneath too. But, you know, I just thought I'd point that out. You're probably wondering, whoa, all of those Ida prints. No, they're not all Ida prints, but a lot of them are. So with Ida's work, he was really interested in the juxtaposition of things that looked quite real, almost sort of creating an illusion of sort of reality, but then being able to produce it as a printed image. So for example, there's this print here. It's a leaf. And this print, I don't know if you could read it here, but it says leaf on paper. It was done, let's see if he dated it here. I think it's 88 is the year. And this is called Leaf on Paper number 6. He did a series of these. And basically, it's simply a leaf that has been printed. And this portion of it, I believe, is a lithograph. And he used photographic processes in his printmaking, much like the work of Noda. And so he added this leaf, and then there's some like this shading, and the shading's printed with a woodblock. And it's printed on this really wonderful handmade paper. You could see the deckling around there. And I should also mention that Ida is very well known for printing prints on both sides. So he created this texture on the verso, and so this is all printed. It's printed with a woodblock, and he wanted to do that because he wanted that effect to come through to the paper to create kind of almost like a ghost-like effect with kind of a gray, sort of uneven background, which really creates an interesting effect on the print. And so he did that in a lot of his prints, and he was famous for this sort of idea, this artistic idea about the in-between. A lot of his prints are titled surfaces in between, and he was thinking about the idea of the point of contact between his idea, of course, and how the print takes that idea on, how the life of that idea sort of takes root into his prints. But it also is about his material and the in-between surface between the printing of the back and then, of course, the printing of the front and how that interacts. And in some of his prints, which are also collages, he is known to sort of thin the paper or even make holes into it, and you could kind of see things come through. He did that with his canvases as well. And so he's just trying to show the viewer sort of what's in the middle, what's in between, the sort of the effect of almost like a ghost-like effect. It is there, but it's not really there, and this just overall wonderful quality that his designs, produce because of that. So I'm just going to zoom in so you could see the wonderful realism of this leaf. It really looks like a leaf. Yeah, I'm going to see if I can move my lighting so that we get a better lighting onto the, yeah, that works a little bit better. And so there's this wonderful tension between the realism of this leaf, and then you get this shadowy effect from the background, which also gives it depth. And it is in this sort of bardo land of in between. Where are we? Where is the viewer? How is the viewer experiencing this print and this leaf? And it's fascinating. It really is. It's very, very strongly poetic as well. His prints have this, they're imbued with poetry, and so and the prints that I think I picked out today really show that. Here's another print of another leaf, and same thing. We have a leaf that is printed with a lithography, and the background is again a woodblock printed background, which again creates this really wonderful pattern. This one is much more pronounced than on this paper, and that's because this paper is a typical Ida Shoichi paper. It's very thin, but it almost feels like vellum. It's thin, but an interesting surface, and it's quite robust. This paper doesn't tear so easily, where this is handmade Japanese paper of varying thickness. And I think he liked this because the thickness, the uneven thickness of the paper also prints very interestingly. The background does not come through so evenly, which creates that wonderful effect. Here, the effect is much more even. This almost has like a textile quality to it. There's a kind of this pattern that sort of almost repeats onto itself. It's a very different effect, but you still get this sense of this mysterious, sort of very realistic leaf in this wonderful sort of background that could be everywhere and nowhere. So here's one last one, and this is a fascinating print. Again, we have a very similar leaf, and you'll notice they're all very different. They're not the same leaf. He is known to have used the same leaf on different prints, but in these three, I wanted to show different leaves and how realistic they are, and you could see the wonderful shadow that the leaf sort of produces. He created that shadow, and it looks so realistic. Now, the background has this really wonderful, almost abstract-like ink splashes. And what I'll do is show you the back. That is printed, and it's printed to echo the calligraphy or the brush that's very calligraphic. Obviously, we don't see a character here, but it almost looks like it's an extreme close-up, and you may not see the other parts of the character, but it does look like a brush of some sort. And the sumi pigment that was left there by the brush. Now, this is printed, not a brush applied. Because it's printed, he made more than one, obviously. And this one is additioned A out of P, and he would do that too. He would addition them by letters. And what happens here is this wonderful tension of the realism of the leaf with this sort of pseudo-abstract quality of the background. That black does come through, but it comes through in some sort of ghost-like effect again. And so there's this tension. And it also sort of, there's a lot here. There's a lot to unpack. There's the tension. You could almost argue that there's this Zen-like attention to detail. And then you could see this leaf being so uber realistic. And so in Zen, there's this idea of being mindful. And there's these meditation practices when you're really trying to be mindful of everything that comes in contact with you. That reminds me of a meditation that Buddhist monks do, where they walk on pebbles and they want to feel every single pebble that is underfoot. And so this idea of being so attunely aware of this leaf reminds me of that. And at the same time, the background is almost sort of this chaotic, abstract quality, which may also suggest the other aspect of reality. So there's this duality, there's this tension, and it's wonderful. It's wonderful. Another way of describing this is almost like the yin-yang symbol. And so at the heart of the black, there's the white dot. And so there, at the height of the black, there's the white dot, and at the height of the white is the black dot. So there's this wonderful tension of there is something that is uber real. I mean, the detail here is striking, and yet at the same time, there's also this subjective sort of dreamlike quality in the background that is abstract. And this print speaks to ideas that are native in the Japanese culture, but it also speaks to a greater artistic international sort of school of thought. And it has this very simple, elegant, minimalistic quality that was very popular in not just in Japanese art, but in contemporary art in the 60s and 70s, even in the 80s. This minimalist quality that is found in all of Ida's work. And so, I just wanted to point that out as well. So I'm going to zoom in so you could see all three. As a point of sort of point this out for connoisseurs, Ida's prints, though he produced a lot of artwork, they're actually done in very low editions. And so, for example, this is A out of P, and he may have made, the P stands for maybe, I have to look this up, but you have to count how many letters there are from A to P, and this is basically number 1. So maybe, what is it, P, the 13, 12, 13, 14th letter. So this is maybe 1 out of 14. And this is 5 out of 5, this impression. So that gives you an idea of the scale of his production of each impression. There are not that many out there. He did a lot of prints, but each print, there's a very low edition. Relatively speaking, his contemporaries were producing prints in editions of 200 or 300 or even 500. Some of them weren't even editioned. And he kept the tradition of making prints in lower numbers. I often described him sort of as the Onchi of contemporary art, and I think that's a very good analogy because he and Onchi approached printmaking very similarly. They had a very interesting, very individualistic philosophy about making prints, and they made prints for themselves, and which advanced their own ideas. And also, they were done in low editions, and I just think they were both very innovative artists. They broke new ground in printmaking, and so I often see Ida in this way. So okay, now that we've discussed the leaves, now I'm going to pull out some other prints so that we could see a little bit more of the variety of his work. Now, I'm going to try to do this with one hand. Let's see if I could do it. I think I can. I've been doing these Woodblock Wednesdays now for over a year, so I've gotten quite good at moving prints with one hand and videotaping with the other. So this is a really interesting print. This print, first of all, I'll just say how striking this is. It looks like the artist burnt the edges of this print. So the edges are not printed. They've been burnt. They've been singed with some sort of flame. to create this effect. It actually makes the paper pop more. It frames the paper in a way that is really quite striking. I've never seen this done. And then he has this very realistic fly. That looks like it's an etching, actually. And then we have some fingerprints that are on the surface of the paper that are printed. They are his fingerprints. And then there's these sort of like stains that look like water stains. And then there's this area that looks like it's been burnt into the paper, but this is actually printed. And this is sort of Ida at work doing what he does best, producing an image with multiple printing effects using different mediums, all on one sheet of paper. I mean, it's outstanding. It's a lot of work to do, and it looks very minimal, and it is, but it's very powerful and potent design. And let me look at the back of this print. Okay, the back is clean. It is not printed from the back on this impression, but you could see the beautiful paper the way that the handmade paper is deckled, and then he singed most of the sides. The bottom is clear of any of the singeing, and then on the right side it picks up on the top right. So, I think that's fascinating. This print reminds me of that book by Suzuki, Beginner's Mind. And in that book, there is a fly that is rendered very similarly in this way. And it's on a blank page. And, it's one of those things. I read that book in college when I was studying Zen, and it's a fantastic book. I highly recommend it. It really gives you the essence of Zen, if I can even describe it that way. And it's interesting, there's no explanation for that fly in that book, but the idea is that there is that sort of connection with detail in the Zen tradition, and at the same time, it's a rejection of it. It's these two polarities, the duality of reality in some ways. And, so this print really echoes that. So I'm not sure if Ida was thinking of Suzuki's book, but they do carry that same quality. The Suzuki's book, I think, was done in the 60s or 70s, and this print was, it's from 1981. Here's the date there. So obviously this is much later, but he may have been aware of it, he may not have been aware of it, but they both are drawing up from the same tradition, which I think is very neat. Now, let me see if I can move something here. Put a sheet of paper there so that I can move this print. Once again, this is another really cool print with an element of nature. Here we have a stick that has been printed with a lithographic process. And the shadow underneath the stick is, I think, a woodblock printed process. It's kind of hard to tell with him because he uses so many different mediums to achieve the effects on his prints that you're playing a guessing game in some ways. And this print is called Paper Between a Twig with Water. And so he's showing you a twig, and obviously it's printed on paper, but what's in between is this sort of the spirit of water. Maybe it's a stick that's on the shore, and you see maybe water coming in. But at the same time, there's this really wonderful sort of fragment here that looks like ink. And I'm going to flip this over, and you could see, again, this really wonderful impression on the back that looks very convincingly like Sumi E. This looks like a painting. If without the stick, it looks like someone just painted this with a brush and black Sumi pigment. And this print, I actually enjoy looking at it both sides. I kind of like to see the stick and the twig in the background almost as like kind of part of a memory, and you're looking at something that is happening here. Maybe the water's coming in into a little area on a cove or somewhere on the seashore. And, you kind of look at this and the stick you remember the stick you picked up 5 years ago on this location. And the idea of the stick is kind of a memory. And so it's there, but it's not there. And at the same time, you could flip it over and then you have the stick. Maybe you took the stick from the shore and you have it in your hand and you're thinking about where it originated. Now, you found the stick on the shore. Again, it's this idea of the in-between. Ida's the point of contact of the print. And it's 2 points of contact in some ways. It's his idea that creates the first point of contact. The idea, and then these two elements in tension between you could even describe it this way, from the front surface, the point of contact with the front versus the back. There is a point of contact, and you could see it play out on each side very differently. It's a fascinating philosophical idea. I love it. And it's also, again, very Zen inspired. It has a very simple but elegant quality. I'm not surprised that Ida lived in Kyoto his entire life. Now, here's another work. This is one of his most well-known prints. It's on the cover of a couple books. They're published in Japan, so you may not have seen them. But this print is called Stone, Paper, and what does that say? Stone, Paper, and Story, which is interesting. And so the print depicts a sheet of paper printed onto this piece of paper. So, and this sheet of paper looks just like an Ida print that we saw earlier. Maybe I can pull that out if I can. Let's see. It would be nice to have an assistant. But during COVID, it's just me here, unfortunately. All right, let's see. I think I can make this work. So here we have this print we talked about earlier. In our conversation, and I see a lot of people have joined us. So if you haven't seen the beginning, I encourage you to watch the beginning because it will make a lot more sense. The background of this print looks quite strikingly similar to this design, but this is printed. This is not a sheet of paper on top of a sheet of paper. This whole sheet of paper is printed in a way, I mean, it is not on top of anything. It is a sheet of paper. But he creates this really wonderful illusion. He's working in a way where he knows that some of his clients, collectors, fans, are familiar with some of his prints. And this sort of quality of this print has been sort of translated onto something much larger. And so this looks like a sheet of paper, and then this stone is amazing. It's rendered with such accuracy. The stone, I'm sure, is a photographic process with lithography that's been printed onto this and onto the design. But it looks like a woodblock print. And so let me see the back. Yeah, you could see he printed the back to create that effect. There's that dark, rich, sumi color that bleeds into the paper to create this. It's fantastic. It looks real. It looks like a real sheet of paper that I could just pick up, but it's not there. It's part of the design. And again, for this, he's trying to find sort of that in-between, between the front surface and the back, but also the idea of the realism of the stone and the realism of what this sheet of paper looks like. And yet this print is a print, and there's this interesting sort of duality, this tension. I love it. It reads so elegantly, so powerfully, and of course, it looks like something only a Japanese artist could produce. Though it is certainly entrenched into the contemporary art world, and it is very much part of that tradition of simple, potent designs that a lot of international artists were doing at the time in the 70s and 80s. Minimalism was very, very important at that time all around the world. So Ida's certainly contributing to it, but at the same time, what makes this inherently Japanese is his love and fascination for the material, the surfaces he's able to achieve. And of course, he's a woodblock printmaker as much as he is a lithographer and mixed media artist. And so his love for paper and the printing process shows. It really does. All right, so the next print, and the last print that I'll talk about, is this really great design. It means abstract, but it's at the same time not abstract. So what we have here are, let me just show you what's really easily recognizable. Some fingerprints. We have some fingerprints, and then these lines. Now, this kind of reminds me of Jasper Johns and like other artists that come to mind that are not just that famous, but print artists. It reminds me of that. But this is very much Ida's own work because, again, he's interested in the surface and the what he can achieve in printmaking form to create illusions and sort of fool the viewer in thinking other things. So this print is actually mounted onto a larger sheet of paper, and the background looks like it's been sort of dyed to kind of a yellow, and it looks very aged. I think he may have dyed it with tea. Who knows what he did? I don't think the color has been printed. I think it's been dyed. And then here, this stain that's around this ink stain looks very convincing, but it is in fact printed. And these green, sort of like, it looks like someone just kind of doodled onto the sheet. That's also been printed. I know this because there are multiple impressions of this print. This was done in edition of 30, and so they all look the same. They all look the same. And so that's something to be said, to be able to be a master printmaker, to achieve the same effect, which looks accidental to the eye, but then being able to reproduce it on a larger scale. Onchi is famous for producing work like this, but he would only be able to produce it in 3 to 5 impressions, and partly because of the limitation of the materials he was using, and also his level of interest in reproducing something over and over again. Ida approached it differently. I think he enjoyed making prints and being able to reproduce these effects over multiple impressions. And as a contemporary work of art, the edition of 30 is actually quite small. When you think about it, his contemporaries were making prints with much larger editions, and I think I said that. So it's one of those things where he has a mastery of the form of the medium, and was able to produce these wonderful effects onto the paper. So I'm going to be quiet for a bit. I think I've been talking too much today. Ida does that to me because it's so, it provokes my philosophical side. Being an ex-philosophy major, this really, it lights up all my all of the lights on my dashboard are lit on his work. So I really like it. So I'm just going to pull out again some of the prints so you could see up close these wonderful effects. Yeah, that gives you a nice sort of taste to Ida's work. I have a, as I said, I'm going to mount an exhibition of his work in maybe a year or two, and all of these will be available. One of the things I want to point out is this is a book that came out. It's a very thick, comprehensive book that the Kyoto National Museum published. It was a retrospective of his work. This exhibition occurred, a few years ago, maybe 4 years ago. And it's a great book. I have it available in my bookstore. It really showcases his prints, but also his sculpture and his paintings. Note that this is the same rock we saw earlier, as in this little burn spot is also the same as here. So that shows you that in fact it is printed, though the edges look convincing. I mean, it looks like it's been burnt, and I think it has, but the middle part has been printed. And again, this book is great. I recommend it. There's a lot of books on Ida's work, but this is the one that came out the most recent, and I think it's pretty comprehensive, and I recommend it. And so I want to point out one other work really quick. This talk's going a little bit long, and it's up on my wall right in front of me, so hold on. I don't know if you could see it. It's kind of dark in my hallway. This is leading into my bathroom and then my kitchen there. But the point is, I wanted to show this work. It's actually mud clay on canvas. Let me see if I can bring my light in. Yeah, that helps. So this work is mud clay on canvas. He included a little bit of gold here, some silver, and this is supposed to be a work that echoes. He was influenced by some Native American cultures, and he traveled in the U.S. and traveled out to New Mexico, Arizona, and that terrain, that part of the world, really influenced him. Also Africa and pottery, and so this surface reads almost like pottery, like earth that's been turned into pottery, but at the same time, it also reads as if like rain has hit the ground and created this really wonderful effect. So it's fascinating, and of course, Ida is always interested in these moments where the eye reads the image a certain way when it's in fact something else. And this looks like it's just a piece of nature that he cut out and put on canvas, but it is very artfully arranged to feel that way, but it is in fact his work, and I could show you the canvas, the edge of it. All of this is on the surface of the canvas, so it's pretty cool. So I noticed that there's some people joining us. Well, welcome. I want to invite all of you to watch the beginning of this presentation on Ida Shoichi. I shared some really great prints that I find quite compelling, and I think you might enjoy watching them as well. And so thank you very much for joining me on Woodblock Wednesday. We featured some wonderful prints by Ida, a contemporary artist who lived and worked in Kyoto. I highly encourage you to look him up. He's a fascinating artist, one of my favorites, and I think you might agree as well. I also wanted to point out that we just went live yesterday with a sale of Japanese prints. So if you're interested, have a look on my website, collectingjapaneseprints.com. And I'm also working hard on my next exhibition of really fantastic prints. This group is going to be phenomenal. So that's coming up sometime in February into March. So keep an eye out for that as well. And I'm also starting to think about Asia Week this year and what presentation, what talk I can give in commemoration of Asia Week, to honor Asia Week, of course, and everyone is doing different things. So if there are videos that you'd like to see on particular artists or areas of printmaking in Japan, let me know. Comment below and share some ideas of things you'd like to see. This entire talk today was inspired by my client Mark, our conversation yesterday. So thank you very much, Mark, for the inspiration on this talk. And so feel free to make suggestions on videos that you'd like to see in the future. And if I can, and I have the material, I'll certainly do that. So thanks again for joining me, and I will see you next week on Woodblock Wednesday. Bye for now.